So The Witcher 3's next-gen update has completely reworked the way multiple Witcher signs function. Aard, Yrden, and Quen have all been affected in major ways. Igni was changed as well, and only Axii escaped the update more or less as it was. The recent sign changes were not detailed in the patch notes, outside of a lone reference to the update integrating various mods. Anyway, I've been putting in the time to extensively test all of the combat changes, today focusing on the sign reworks. I even downloaded a second separate build of the game pre-update so I could show off before and after footage whenever needed. By the way, any pre-update gameplay in this video will be using the old wide camera, while post-update footage will use the new one. That way I don't have to put ugly text on the screen all the time and you'll always know what you're looking at. Now, before we begin with the sign changes, I do need to take a moment as I have a few questions to ask you. Has a peasant ever stabbed you with a pitchfork while you were trying to put an end to a riot? Have you ever been shoved forcefully, resulting in the breakage of your only good leg and a lifetime of crippling pain? Have you ever unknowingly entered an unbreakable contract with an all-powerful demon, who then proceeded to disfigure your face and refuse to remove the mark until you completed 3 nearly impossible tasks? Has that ever happened to you? Well, you probably answered no to at least one of those 3 questions, but the reason I ask is because of today's sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, and no, I'm not kidding, a law firm wanted to sponsor one of my Witcher videos, and let's be real, they're probably not going to approve this version of the ad. If they do though, Morgan & Morgan are an excellent option if you need a personal injury lawyer. They have over 800 attorneys specializing in every area of injury law. Whether you've slipped and taken a fall, been pancaked by a dump truck, or have run into any other injurious misfortune, Morgan & Morgan have got you covered. And there's no reason to feel guilty for seeking injury compensation, as you'll be suing insurance companies worth billions. They also charge you absolutely nothing unless they win your case. The paperwork, the research, the court hearings, no fee without a win. If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. Just go to forthepeople.com/neonnight or dial #law from your cell phone. Okay, to move on, I still can't believe that was a thing, let's start this video off with Aard, which has had its upgraded variant changed drastically. The upgrade in question, Shockwave, has gone from being nearly useless to being an ability that can absolutely destroy high-level enemies. Before the update, Shockwave was a tier 4 skill that added a flat 200 damage to Aard. That might sound good in theory, but it more or less did nothing, as by the time you get to the final tier of skill upgrades, 200 damage is meaningless in combat. I mean, just watch the gameplay on your screen, you can't even tell damage is being dealt. Thankfully though, with the new update, Shockwave has been fully reworked, although you'd never really know by looking at the patch notes or even the game itself. The perk description now says that, at max level, Aard will deal an extra 300 damage, and that the damage directly scales with the level of the enemy. Well, that 300 number is completely irrelevant, so just forget that, and saying that the damage scales with enemy level really doesn't properly describe how this perk works now. You'll be happy to hear that what it does is upgrade Aard into an absolute powerhouse against high health enemies, as with Shockwave it now removes a percentage of enemy health as opposed to a set number. What percentage of remaining health it takes is dependent on your sign intensity. It caps out at 10%, which I found isn't all that hard to hit. By the time you have enough skill points to even get to Shockwave, you'll likely already be around at least 6 or 7% with a somewhat optimized build. Anyway, what this all means in practice is that Shockwave Aard is now extremely effective at softening up high-level enemies. When combat begins, each cast of the sign can strip away thousands of health points. However, because it's a percentage-based system, this also means that each subsequent use of Aard on damaged enemies will become less and less effective. So with this troll for instance, I start out dealing over 4,000 damage, which is insane. Yet I eventually wear it down to the point where Aard is dealing just 1 point of damage, because it's a percentage-based system, and this enemy has almost no health left. In fact, even though it says 1, I think I'm being rounded down to 0 at this point, because I tried for about 3 minutes and this troll just refused to die. Point is, Shockwave is well worth using now, it's incredible against bosses and pretty nice against groups, but I do think it's important to know how it works. In addition to the Shockwave change, Aard was also given 2 nerfs. The first is pretty simple to explain, as insta-kill knockdowns now require more of a sign build commitment if you want to pull them off against similarly leveled enemies. When I say insta-kill knockdown, what I mean is just when Aard stuns an enemy to the point where they stay down for a time, and you can just walk over and finish the job with 1 button. There are regular knockdowns where they get right back up, and then there are the extended ones. Those specifically are going to be a little less frequent now against enemies near your level, and while this is technically a nerf, I do think it's a good change. This comes down to preference, but I have always found the press X to kill mechanic really unsatisfying, and almost always would just prefer to finish combat normally, so anything that reduces that type of knockdown happening constantly is fine by me. The other Aard nerf is a little more substantial and has to do with the Piercing Cold mutation. If you don't know, that's the Aard freeze upgrade from Blood and Wine. It used to give the sign a 25% chance to freeze enemies. Anything not frozen would be hit with extra damage, and all enemies who were affected by both freeze and any form of knockdown would instantly die. Before the update, what this meant was you could run into combat scenarios, use Aard, and instantly kill some enemies before the fight had even properly started. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case, as the Aard freeze mechanic now relies on adrenaline points. Just a reminder, adrenaline is this meter that builds up during combat. Without a certain upgrade, or unless you've just exited a different fight, that meter is going to be empty when combat begins. With the new update though, if you don't have any adrenaline, your chance to freeze enemies with Piercing Cold equipped is down from 25% to 0. Each tick of the adrenaline meter now increases your chance to freeze by 10% for a max of 30. Because of that, you'll no longer be able to freeze any enemies with Piercing Cold at the start of combat, which also means no Aard insta-kills until you've built up your adrenaline. You can mitigate this a bit with a perk like Razor Focus, which gives you 1 adrenaline point when a fight begins, but overall this is quite the nerf to Piercing Cold. The title of this video was not an exaggeration. Most of these sign changes are nothing to ignore. Personally, I am not a fan of this change. For the most part, these reworks I've been covering on the channel, like the ones to Witcher armor, I either don't mind or think are very positive. Most of them are meant to make the combat a little more thoughtful for a longer amount of time, because eventually, if you're putting any effort into your build, the combat will become easy outside of maybe a handful of bosses that will throw you off on a first playthrough. With something like Piercing Cold though, by the time you're getting it, you're already way past that point, and it's the fun stuff like Piercing Cold that can keep things interesting. The ability can only insta-kill enemies that are knockdownable too, so it's not like it ever let you score free kills on anything that wasn't already going to be very easy. That's not even to mention that this doesn't just affect the insta-kills. Without Razor Focus, you have a 0% chance to freeze enemies at all when combat starts, which takes a lot of the fun away from the mutation. Most of the changes I'm covering today are either fine or really nice, but this one I'm just not a fan of. Moving on from Aard, let's talk about Igni. There's less to discuss here, as Igni just had its burn effect reworked a bit. Pre-update, it was very easy to reach 100% chance to burn, meaning that every time you cast Igni, the enemy would ignite instead of just taking the initial damage. This made the Pyromaniac skill useless, because by the time you were getting to that skill tier, you likely would have already reached maximum burn long ago. To make that skill worth using, how you increase your burn chance has changed a bit. It used to be totally linear. Your sign intensity goes up, so does your burn at a constant rate until maxed out. Needless to say, it no longer works that way. Now, just to put it simply, the closer you get to 100% burn chance, the less further sign intensity will have any effect. Getting from 0 to 25 will be easy, same with 25 to 50, but as you keep increasing your sign intensity, you'll notice some serious diminishing returns. What this does is make Pyromaniac a not completely useless perk, which it absolutely was pre-update, even if the description might have made it seem like a worthy investment. That's it for Igni, but Quen, like Aard, was changed in multiple ways. The first is fairly subtle, as the sign no longer removes damage over time effects. For example, if you'd been lit on fire pre-update, casting Quen would immediately extinguish it. Now if you're on fire and cast the sign, you will stop taking damage, but the burn status will persist and begin consuming Quen. Damage will only resume if your shield breaks while the effect is still active. The other change is to the skill Active Shield, aka the alternate version of Quen. How this used to work was that all damage absorbed by the active Quen shield would heal you, which made getting back to full health incredibly easy. Post-update though, the amount of health you get back is partially dependent on your sign intensity. If you've invested in it, alternate Quen still heals you very quickly, but if you haven't, the healing effect is pretty much worthless, so you're much better off with the normal sign variant. Active Shield is still a very powerful perk, but it's just another example of why this video needed to be made, because if you were to throw Active Shield into a build where you'd barely invested in signs, then it would be a complete waste of a slot. By the way, I feel like this change might lead to at least a few overly dramatic comments about how it's terrible, but in practice, it's really not a bad rework. Active Shield wasn't ever a perk you'd want to use unless you'd somewhat invested in your stamina and signs, and that's still the case. Now it's just not quite as powerful early game and becomes better as you progress. Like I said, most of these changes are clearly meant to extend how long combat remains somewhat challenging and thoughtful, while also making late game mechanics more powerful because they're fun and the gameplay is beyond easy by that point anyway. The Piercing Cold rework is the weird outlier, which is why I'm really not a fan of that one. Okay, let's wrap this video up with the major change to Yrden, in this case a rework to Supercharged Glyphs. Before the update, all this skill really did was add a flat damage value to the sign, meaning any enemy standing within Yrden would lose 50 HP per second. That may sound kinda useful, but it was borderline worthless as it was a late game skill, and at that point damaging an enemy by 50 is nothing. You will have far better tools at your disposal. Well, post-update, the newly improved Supercharged Glyph scales with enemy health, meaning it's extremely powerful against tanky enemies. And again, this change falls into that category of making endgame or new game plus skills more fun, which I'm all for. Well, that does it for today's video. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like, and I just wanted to say that I'm thinking about doing another video like this on the mini unannounced changes to bombs and potions, and then one other upload on the skill/perk overhauls, and I suppose I could even cover the Runewright rework, which is extensive. Anyway, then I could put everything, including this video and the one I did on the reworked Witcher armor, into a playlist. Let me know if you'd like to see those other videos. I honestly expected that Witcher armor video to bomb, but then it did really well, but I'm not sure how a video about potions would do. We'll see, but for now, thank you for watching. If you're new around here, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.